So we are here to talk about this afternoon, thinking about what we can do about modernization and decarbonization, and what policies impact that, and how public funding can help support that. And so when we start a panel, I always like to start thinking about foundations and how do we define terms to make sure we're all level set. And so my first question to the panelists is, how would you define modernization in terms of decarbonization?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Sassine. I work at NYSERDA, which is the clean energy agency for the state of New York, or the Department of Energy for the state of New York. And I'm in charge of large-scale renewables, so think of anything above 10 megawatts, whether it's offshore wind, onshore renewables, transmission, energy storage, green hydrogen. To put things in context from our perspective and in the context of New York, we have something called the New York Climate Act, which is a law that mandates us to get to 70% renewables by 2030. We're at 24% of our electricity today is generated by renewables. So getting to 70% by 2030 and a zero emission grid by 2040. And there are interim goals along the way. And so, for example, 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 10 gigawatts of solar by 2030, 6 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. And so for us, this is, at least in New York, this is our North Star, our anchor for all our work, and at least how, in my world, I define modernizing the grid. And given that I'm in charge of large-scale renewables, I have a very biased, narrow view, and it's mainly on deploying large-scale renewables as part of the grid modernization strategy. So.
Good afternoon. I am Nancy Bui-Thompson. I am on the board of directors at SMUD. We are the country's 6th largest public utility, and we are elected as the board members. So I represent over 250,000 constituents that come to the voting booths every 4 years. Luckily, I'm on a presidential cycle, so people actually come out and vote. But when I see modernization is really anywhere but yesterday. So if you look at our grid systems today, Edison could understand a lot of what's on our grids, right? And so as we look to the future, it's a buckshot approach and not a silver bullet. It's bringing in all classes of people to understand where we need to go. Everybody in this room, we're all on the same page. We all work for a utility. We all work for a company that supports the utility. But how do we get our systems and our communication in place to bring the next generation of people who really are much more aware, who are much more interested in where the energy comes from? I would say it's often a generational divide. For a long time, just even as an elected official, we were deemed to do two things, which is keep the lights on and the rates low. And that's really all that people wanted from us, not just as a utility, but as an elected person. They vote for you. They wanted to make sure their bills don't go up. Now, as we look at the next, generation of our grid and modernizing our grid, it's a multi-level approach of how do we modernize communication? How do we modernize our outreach to make sure that we are reaching all the different sectors? SMUD was the first utility to have a TikTok account and to have a TikTok contest. And it was amazing. I think now our campaign is over 1 million hits. Everybody's on TikTok. My dog is on TikTok. So it's looking at where we need to go, but also looking at how to bring all of our different sectors and populations together to be as excited as we are for the future.
Great. I'm Debbie Brodt Giles. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And I'm here also representing the U.S. Department of Energy and their American-Made program. So that's a program all about prizes and networking and doing amazing things to try to modernize our grid and improve innovation across the board. And so some of the university teams that were here earlier today are part of that American-Made Challenges program, which I'm really proud to see all those folks here. But when I'm thinking about modernizing the grid, it's very broad in my mind. So it's everything from actually grid technologies, but also like EV technologies, charging technologies, and then anything that's related to decarbonization as well, because that's an important piece as well. And so, yeah, I'm just excited for this conversation, and the prizes that we are doing really cross the entire board of clean energy in general, and I think we need like all of those innovations to kind of add up together to get us to the next place.
Thank you. Those are all great answers. And so the second question is, this idea of public funding. I think traditionally it has meant just government funding, and as we sit awash in government funding, what are other means or other definitions that you're using public funding? And that may include philanthropy, maybe includes, utility funds, but what are other ways that you can think about defining public funding? And specifically for you, Debbie, we'll start with you. I'm curious about the American-Made program and what makes that such an innovative source of funding for energy innovators.
Sure, thanks. It's really innovative because traditionally, obviously, the federal government has been doing their same thing for quite a long time. And so I think it's really been very enlightening to see them start to think a little bit out of the box and be a little bit more innovative with the way they think to get new innovative technologies into the marketplace. So these prizes are really turning everything on its head. Normally they do like FOAs or grants where people have to actually come to the table, put out their really great idea, do a lot of paperwork to try to get their idea seen by someone in the government, and then they might get awarded, and then if they get awarded, there's a long road ahead of them to actually implement what they actually said they were going to do, report on that. If there's cost share involved, there's a lot of information and a lot of details that they need to give the government. And these prizes really are turning that on its head. So we are designing these prizes so that they are kind of stair-stepped approach, so that the first step is really, really low barrier to entry. Almost anybody can get in on many of these first phases of the prize, and we're doing that intentionally because we want to open the door to new innovators who have never worked with the government before, especially from those from underserved communities who really just didn't know how to get involved with some government funding. So that first stair step sometimes looks like a plan, an action plan, or a partnership plan, or something that's pretty easy. And then we can evaluate those and then keep passing through the competitors throughout the prize process for whatever the prize is for. And it could look like anything from kind of business plans, like the university teams are doing this when you saw them pitch earlier today, to other kind of softer things like building coalitions, to very technical things like niche technical solutions, or broad solar prize. The solar prize is all about solar innovations. So it's all over the board, but you can always design these prizes to be kind of in those stair-stepped ways, so that's a nice, easy, low barrier to entry, and then allow people to compete along the way. And I think what's really unique is that these prizes, we ask people, do something even little, then we can evaluate how that went, and we can give you a prize, and then we hope that you're going to keep, using that money to keep working through the prize competition. But the other amazing thing is that once you've done something and you've won prize money, then you could take that money and do whatever you need to do with it, to build your business, to get to the next step of your innovation, to hire somebody, or to pay the rent if that's important to you. So, and there's really, in my mind, no risk to the government, because we ask you to do something, you do it, and then you get rewarded for that prize. So it's really a new way of thinking, and I think DOE is really actually excited about kind of thinking in this new, unique way, and so there's a lot of prizes that are coming because of that.
There will be a large windfall, obviously, with other programs, but when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill, I mean, that's close to $1 trillion, right, between the 600 and the 300 million. But we, as a local utility, realize that it's not just going to take the federal government, which is great, to give money. We want to give on a local level. So we have a program through our Sustainable Communities program that I believe is quite different than other utilities. So oftentimes utilities will give grant funding based on something that will benefit the utility, a solar or a battery or something. right? So with our program called our SHINE program, it doesn't have to be necessarily a direct energy EV battery project. It's things that help air quality, help mental health, help workforce development. One grant in my district, we call them wards in Sacramento, it was for soil-borne farms. So you can imagine it's a farm, right? And they teach the next generation of would-be farmers in a very suburban place how to farm. And so we found that these grants, anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000, can make a significant difference. Also because we know that there are large barriers of entry. I mean, these forms for some of these grants are longer than college applications, even with the Common App, right? And so we've streamlined our application process and also the reporting out, because we realize a lot of these not-for-profits are maybe run by one or two people. They don't have the capacity. And so we've seen that offering a large smattering of grants to various things that help our communities become sustainable in whatever way that may be. That may be food stability, that may be economic stability, that might be health and air quality, or it could be something to contribute to our solar regatta. We find that there needs to be not just this windfall from federal funds, but what can we do on a bit of a microloan level to push ingenuity, push entrepreneurship, so that we can give that little seed money. When you think about it, I look at programs like Heifer International. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So instead of buying Christmas gifts or birthday gifts, I buy people chickens, or I share in a cow, or I share in a goat. And believe it or not, these small grants to people in villages can be a life-changing grant, right? And so that's what we see, that it doesn't need to be millions of dollars. It can be just $10,000 that can just get a very small farm up and out of the always running in the red. So that's what we're excited to continue to expand every year and to contribute to our local economy.
Yeah, listen, I think like you said, the Inflation Reduction Act is a game changer for the industry. And from our perspective in the state of New York, we're trying to piggyback on this and complement it with some local incentives. So for example, for storage and bulk energy storage, the IRA slashes the cost in half. And we have a goal to get to 6 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. We're at 1 gig today. So we really need to deploy these assets very, very fast. So what we're considering of doing is an innovative renewable energy credit, like a REC structure that would be funded by ratepayers. And it would be indexed to energy prices and capacity prices. So I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say the developers, the private sector, has bid in a price of 100. If the cost is at 110, if the market prices are at 90, the government basically would subsidize $10. If it's at 110, the government would receive $10. So basically, it's a dynamic indexed structure that would complement the IRA that we're considering. The second thing I want to mention is, at least in the renewable energy markets, inflation has been a big challenge as of late, what's been happening in the world. And something we've been considering and adopting in New York is these REC concepts that are pegged to inflation. So the developers of the private sector would be shifting that risk. And again, it would be, if inflation is positive, we would cover it. If it's deflation, we would benefit from it. But we're using these more dynamic REC structures to fund projects going forward and make sure they do get built.
So one of the descriptions of this panel, we're talking about policies and legislation. And for those that don't know, the Regulatory Assistance Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that supports energy regulators in the energy transition. And as much as we talk about utilities are still very much regulated by multiple entities. And so I would love for you guys to talk about what are policies or regulatory schematas that you've seen that have helped support modernization of the grid, digitalization, or some of the other themes that we've heard today?
I can start there. So SMUD back in the day, I've been on the board now, strangely, I'm 15 years now as an elected member. And when I started on this journey, SMUD was the first large utility in the state of California to declare a 20% renewable goal. Well, that's come and gone many years ago. And as we look forward, SMUD is now known as the first large utility in the country and possibly in the world to declare a zero carbon goal by 2030. And that's very different than net zero. It's much harder. Thank you to our staff here. And I did want to acknowledge we have several of our SMUD executives and board members here, Rob Kurth and Brandon Rose, and our CEO, Frankie McDermott, and our CEO, Paul Lau. As a board, we were the ones who have pushed for decades, but it was our CEO, Paul Lau, who said we will be the first. He has a plan, we will get there, but it's not going to be easy, right? We currently are looking at just about anything that will help us get there, and from carbon capture to batteries, and what we see is that it's going to be more than just setting the policies. It's how can we, as we regulate our own utility, right? But then we all are managed by regulators. Is how do we as a board set the right policies to make sure we're going in the right direction? So along with our zero carbon by 2030, we've also set policies around renewables and types of renewals, right? So in California, you think of the sunshine state, right? Well, it's not always sunny. It's not always windy. And so how do we capture this, right? How do we capture this energy that we get a large amount of? We have delta winds in the evenings, and it's very sunny. It can be 105 dry heat. And so we've set policies as a board. Our staff has set policies as to how do we get to the zero carbon, and one of them has been around battery storage. So we have a great partnership. I don't know if he's here. I think Eric Dusselhouse from ESS, an amazing company that has long duration battery. And that is just going to be one of the solutions that will help us get to where we need to go. Because unfortunately, we may all want to go green. Our policies is to go green. But our customers, when they turn on the light switch, they want the lights to come on. And if you are 100% renewable without any battery storage, good luck to you keeping your job when there is a storm or a large outage. And so partnering and having these public-private partnerships and setting those policies that enable that is the only way we're going to get there. Because as a utility, we're very, I would say risk-averse is a word that I would like to use. We at SMUD, we've always been, we feel ahead of the curve, but we like to say we're on the cutting edge and not the bleeding edge. And so by working with partners like ESS and other companies, OSI is another great partner for us for ADMS, that's how we're gonna get to where we need to go. But as a policymakers, we have to set these policies and these large, high barriers and let our staff and the industry help us get there. I think that flexibility when setting the policies is key, because we do not want to be descriptive. We do not want to pick the winners and losers. We need to say, here's our goals, this is where we need to go, and all you smart people in the room, come to us with ideas as to how to get there.
Well, I'm not a utility person, so I don't have a lot to say about utility regulations specifically, but I will say that there's a lot of our prizes are focused on kind of community building, local governments, and things like that. So I guess what I have seen is that just being able to give some organizations, especially local organizations, a little bit of funding to kind of start to have these conversations, develop these partnerships at a local level, I think is really, really important.
Well, I did touch on the New York Climate Act earlier as our North Star that's guiding everything we're doing. But how do you put it in action, right? How do you adopt these policies, make sure you have a broad set of stakeholders that agree with this policy, support it, and help us execute and implement it, which is really critical, politically and on the ground. And so what we've done in New York is, we've created something called the New York Climate Action Council, which represented different perspectives from different industries, whether it's academia, labor unions, startups, you name it. And they got together and over a couple of years developed a plan on how do we achieve the goals, a roadmap, how do we achieve the goals of our New York Climate Act. And they've gone on a roadshow across the state, evangelized all the different ideas, got feedback from citizens, from people. It was phenomenal. I attended one of them, and I think it was in Long Island, and 600 people showed up with their kids and their wives and their families, and it was really phenomenal to see the level of engagement that people had on this topic, because at least in New York, it's not only about energy policy or climate policy, but also about industrial policy and creating jobs and having people be part of the transition and putting disadvantaged communities at the heart of the clean energy transition. So I think stakeholder engagement has really been the bedrock of adopting any new policy and advancing it and making sure it is successful.
So on the flip side of that, what policies or regulations are hindering your ability to continue to move forward? And that could be at the federal level, state, jurisdiction, but what are things that are kind of hindering that progress?
I'll just briefly say it, and I'll say it again, and I don't think there's any California regulators in here. I hope that I hope you watch this online, especially our legislature. So what happens a lot, especially with SMUD, is we get a member of an elected office, and I won't say which house, that loves our programs. And then they steal it and then mandate it without funding it, asking the subject matter experts how the best way to do it, or even look at the goals and outcomes. So what I would say, if anybody's watching from home, is, again, set the goals and targets and don't micromanage and don't pick winners and losers. I mean, you see who the lobbyists are by the legislation that comes through, and there are some very strong lobbyists in California, and that's not helping us. And so let the local regulators do their job. Let the local boards, because Sacramento is very different than Trinity. Sacramento is very different than San Diego. Set us statewide goals, set us federal goals, but don't tell us you have to have 8% solar, 4% biomass, blah, blah, blah. And again, you can see who lobbies and pays the most. You see that solar, you have to have 40% solar by X amount. Well, it's not always sunny everywhere, people. So let's get to a common renewable goal, a carbon-free goal that, all parts of the country, based on where they are, can meet them, because it's very different across this country. So to say everybody needs to be carbon-free by X, it's gonna hurt a lot of businesses. And I'm not in the business of hurting people, right? This is about jobs, not just about the green wave. It's about how do we keep our communities healthy and happy and not mandate and micromanage.
Well, from my perspective, when it comes back to deploying large-scale renewables, there's two major barriers: transmission build-out, and basically nothing's getting built in general, right? Like the permitting processes, the interconnection processes take way too long. I always actually use Texas. We're in Texas today. Use Texas as an example. It takes 18 months to build a large-scale renewable project here in Texas, or a transmission project, when it takes 7+ years in New York, right? So there's something off here. Where whether it's on the federal government side or state or local governments, we need to reform, all our permitting processes and get stuff built faster in an environmental and socially responsible way. But there has to be a way to do this better and faster,
Yeah, I agree. And just keeping it open to everybody to participate in this transition, I think, is really important. And so having these opportunities where people can come in and play all these different roles. There's roles for changing the regulations. There's roles for, the new innovations that we need to get into the marketplace. And yeah, I think that's important.
So I think we will open it up for questions from the audience. It's hard to see from here.
It's hard to see.
I can't see if there's any questions because all of the lights are here.
I'll just yell it out. Great presentation. Thank you, Nancy. and the typical person that is not engaged in the utility, that's not part of the day-to-day discussion, but as they are seeing this change unfold, what do you think is the resistance points, and how do organizations like y'all's address those? Thank you.
Well, I think transparency and access to data and information to understand what's going on, I think, is paramount. In New York, this is something we're taking seriously, and we're actually about to launch at the end of the year a very first platform that actually gives citizens and customers access to utility data. And I think a big challenge there has been how do utilities get comfortable sharing data in an anonymous way without increasing cybersecurity risk, right? So it's a very serious risk that it poses, but this is something we're working through, and we're hoping that by sharing data at a granular level, at a customer level, at a community level, and a state level would empower people to better understand what's going on and what's about to come, and how they can participate and make better decisions, and participate actively in the market themselves.
As we look forward, I talked a lot about social media and digital, this and that. But what we have found as a utility is actually bringing back the human side of things. And so when someone calls our call center and is struggling to understand what is going on, what is this surcharge, what are these programs, we have our CSRs spend that time, but we also follow up with handwritten cards to people. People will oftentimes call with these horrible stories. People have passed away. They can't afford the solar company that conned them into, the lease solar. Don't do it, by the way, anybody. And we will follow up with a human to explain their options, send them a handwritten card. I'm so sorry for your loss. We have ambassadors, we have our board members that go door to door. Back in the day, we used to call them light bulb walks, where we would change out their incandescents with CFLs. Now we go door to door with LEDs, but we also go to door with staff that can actually do a bit, I don't want to use the word home invade, but like a home makeover, and they'll run through the house and see what weatherization that they need, appliances, and connect them right on the spot with what they need to electrify their homes or weatherize their homes. We have community tree plantings where we send our staff. We have a great partnership with the Sacramento Tree Foundation. We've planted hundreds and thousands of trees to bring people out in the community, connect them, talk to them about programs. We pay for staff members at local nonprofits and chambers. We actually will pay for part of an employee that or as a staff from SMUD. We will loan them out to our local nonprofits, chambers of commerce, so that there is someone on hand so that business people can come and talk to in the office. So we find that going back to just the human touch to get to those that are most reluctant. I mean, we're gonna, the next generation will be, like I said, a buckshot approach. We've got TikTok, we have Instagram, we have a Christmas light contest on Facebook. We'll get that population, but we still, as I mentioned before, have a large population just wants the lights on, the rates low. And so that we found, especially during the pandemic and now coming out of the pandemic, is people just want to talk to people. They are tired of Zoom town halls. They are clamoring for opportunities to talk to someone, especially those that are shut in at home. SMUD partners with several organizations through the community that help deliver Meals on Wheels and deliver resources. This is what people want going forward, is knowing that the utility is there not just to provide a service, but that actually cares about them as human beings and want to reach out and educate and spend that time literally on someone's doorstep or through a drive-through. We have a great international car show that we sponsor where we bring all the EV dealerships out, and there are no salespeople there. So we feature every EV available except I think the Porsche and the i7. But we bring all the dealerships out and we have their people. You cannot buy a car, you cannot have any transactions, but we're there just to offer that advice and guidance. And that's the sort of thing that people need. They don't want to just search for an EV online anymore. They actually want to drive one. They want to talk to someone. They want to talk to other EV owners to better understand their charging experience and how they've enjoyed having an electric vehicle. So that's really where we're focusing our funding, our time, is getting people back in the community, funding those positions, going door to door, working with those not-for-profits that are reaching those most, underserved communities. We have a heat map that SMUD designed that looks at where our most underserved communities are, and that's where we're putting our resources. That's where we're going to be putting our EV charging stations. For us, most of the rebates were just for brand new cars. I mean, we are pushing for rebates for used vehicles, and then if you get one, well, where do you charge it? If you live in an apartment building, where can you charge your car? And so that's what we're looking at. How do we provide, charging infrastructure in the most, underserved areas, so that even if we help you get into one, oftentimes you don't have the capability to have a charger. So doing multi-family charging, community charging, that's where we see. But it's sending out these advocates that say, I'm a middle income person, but yet I have an EV, and let me help you. So going forward, it will be a mix of the digital revolution, but it will be a much heavier hand to bring that population with us, because we will need all sorts of people to help us to get to this zero carbon and join the pledge. And we have that campaign, which is Join Our Clean Power City Pledge, and we really want all of our constituents and community members to be a part of that.
Great, and I just want to add, because that was perfect, that I feel like we do need everybody, right? Because we have this huge lift to get to the clean energy transition of the future, and I just want to hone in on the workforce, right? So if we really work hard on getting more people like the people that are in this room, so maybe in many years we'll have thousands of people. We need millions of people to work with us on everything that we're doing plus more. And so I think growing the workforce of the future is huge. And then I think eventually, as more and more people kind of get into the clean energy economy, then it will be a lot easier to just bring those people along with us. We won't need to educate them as much along the way, because they will have been educated. They've already come along with us and hopefully been helping us along the way.
I also just want to remind everybody, a lot of that work is also being done at the federal level. I mean, FERC has an Office of Public Participation, and that office is not just going out to your traditional stakeholders. They are going to community groups. They are going to housing authorities. They are showing up at places where you wouldn't traditionally think FERC would need to go. Same thing for DOE and EPA. And so as communities start to come together, one of the things we're seeing are housing advocates. We're starting to see food advocates. We're starting to see environmental groups and conservation groups ask, where should I be involving myself and my organization and my community into this space? And so that's where I think, again, when we think about public funding, it can't just stop at government funding. We have to think about philanthropy. We have to think about all of these conservation groups, all of these other types of organizations showing up and asking questions of, where do I fit in and how do I learn to speak your language?
Definitely. There's plenty of room for everybody, and we need to partner and, bring even more money to the table, so that's a great point.
Other questions? I think there's somebody in the back.
So I find that there's a huge problem with climate and energy messaging, because especially with these kinds of projects, these really big kinds of projects, you need everybody on board. But it's really hard to do that, especially the way we're communicating, because the average person does not care about the climate, and that's fair. They care about getting food on their table. And the people that talk nowadays, they talk about the polar bears and the ice caps. But we really have a problem with localizing these issues. And you need conservatives and people on the right on board, and they also don't care about climate, but what they do care about is independence, resiliency, cost, and jobs. And these are things that energy initiatives can provide. So what has your experience been in what kind of messaging has been used with you guys who have been in the regulatory and government space, and also what kind of changes would you like to see to the kind of messaging?
So I agree with you. It's very complicated, and so what SMUD has done, and we've continued to do, is have focus groups. And what came out of just a recent one is keep the messages simple, and keep them, in a way that anybody, whether you're college educated or not, can understand, because climate change is real and not everybody believes it. And so when we, raise our fixed charge, I, as someone who lived in 12 apartments, in 9 years with oftentimes, 8 to 14 people, when we raise our infrastructure charge, I have to constantly remind our staff that it may just be $4 to some of you, but $4 to me and my family meant whether or not my mom could go to work. $4 meant whether or not we could keep the lights on. And so trying to keep our message very simple in terms of we aren't using these charges to invest in green energy so that you can breathe the air. Simple as that, so that you can drink the water so it's not polluted with our gas power plants. And for our members in the business community, all they want to do is try to keep their operating costs low, right? So anytime they see these fancy programs, it does not register to them unless you make it relevant to their day-to-day job, is that if we help keep the community happy, healthy, you will have more people coming to your restaurant. If we keep them employed, if we keep them in a house, you will have more people buying cars. So it's not just about energy usage, it's about the whole climate as a community. And those are the messages that we have found will resonate, is let's make sure that we have a healthy, happy, productive community so that we can contribute, so that we can drink the water, we can breathe the air, and we can have members of our society who want to be part and that can live in the communities that they work in, right? A lot of people have to commute long distances, which lead to, CO2 emissions. So how do we form housing, and how do we have public transportation by that housing? So it's keeping things simple, it's talking to people where they are, it's hiring people who look like each other, and making sure that we're able to be flexible and nimble with those messages so that we can cater to whatever population that we're speaking to.
I would also add, from a regulatory perspective, I think what was talked about in the last panel, affordability, that is something that is continuously coming up, because ultimately we know that the clean energy transition is going to cost more money. And a real question that we are struggling with in terms of thinking about regulatory policy, and this goes from, again, federal, state commissions, state energy offices, and thinking about even IRA and IIJA money, a lot of those are in form of tax credits. Well, if you don't pay taxes or you can't weatherize your home, you can't necessarily benefit. And so a lot of that question around affordability and what's that right mix and who pays for what when are questions that we'll have to continuously push. So we are down to the wire, and so I would like to ask our panelists one last question, which is in line with the theme. So if you are thinking about modernization or public funding, what weird thing would you want to do?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think, because I come from the world of prizes, I think the prize world is so fun. It's so fun and a little bit can be weird. I just think doing something really out of the box, right, would be really fun. Right now, all of the prizes that we're doing are funded by the Department of Energy, but one of the things I would love to do that's a little bit crazy might be partnering with some other organization in here to do something really big, right? We have some prizes that are approaching 50 million in a prize pool, which is big, but can we go even bigger and really make even more of an impact? So if you guys are interested in that, come talk to me. I mean, we could be really creative about a fun, weird prize.
Not necessarily weird, but it's something that I've been advocating for a while that we haven't quite been able to implement at SMUD. So hopefully maybe somebody will raise some money and help us. But I think that adding art and lighting in areas that are underprivileged or in dark alleys, you know, in underserved neighborhoods. There's something about art and lighting that can uplift people. I grew up literally on the wrong side of the tracks. I never saw anything pretty. I never saw anything that sparked my imagination. I lived in what would be considered the projects, right? Apartment buildings with lots of people that were gray and white. And so I would love utilities and companies to partner with the artistic community, with the lighting community, to bring some joy and happiness to areas that never really see it, because you just don't know what might happen when you spark some ingenuity into a young child, or give that spark of hope that there is something more than the four walls of their apartment building with no grass and no parks, because you just may not know what might come from that child. So that's what I would like to see. I've been asking for it for a while, so hopefully there's a grantor out there that would like to help us.
Well, from my perspective, you know, I look around the U.S. and, you know, Europe and other parts of the world, and, you know, everybody is competing on increasing their ambition and their climate goals. I want 70%, not by 2030, by 2040, right? Like, everybody's like competing with each other. But I think we're in an era where we actually need to get stuff built faster and at scale. And with that in mind, what we need to go to try to summarize some of my key points earlier, we need, at least in the U.S., not only to have an energy and climate policy, but an industrial policy and a construction policy to be able to achieve these energy and climate policy goals. And that means reforming, permitting, building supply chain in the U.S. We need these equipments in order to build these projects, and we need to source these here domestically in the U.S., given what's going on in Europe with the Russia-Ukraine war and all the acceleration of renewable energy there, which impacts our ability to achieve our goals if we don't have access to that supply chain. So with that in mind, that's my message here today, is we need to start building faster and bigger immediately. So.
And I will take a minute. Ricky will probably kill me, but I am moderator and I'm on stage now. So to say my idea, which I espouse everywhere, is that utilities should, or people should be able to pay and receive a weekly utility bill through Cash App. And you can ask me more about that and the details of why later. But I do want to thank our panelists. We will be around I think there is a reception after this. But thank you, everyone, for your insight. And I am definitely going to look up your prices.